everyone. Thanks for attending today. We got a panel going on now. This is State of Absolute AppSec by Absolute AppSec. That's me and Ken. By way of introductions, really quick, before we jump into the panel and start actually asking some questions. Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. I currently run a small consulting firm all around application security. I started as a developer, and we'll get into that in a little bit, kind of where application security has come from up to this point, and then where we see it as going. But I'll have Ken introduce himself, and then we'll have our other panelists introduce themselves as well.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Seth's co-host on our podcast, Absolute AppSec. Has anybody actually seen the podcast? Anybody? A couple? A few? Sweet. So not a ton, but yeah, it's pretty much not a ton.
Not a ton.
But it's like a practical sort of, AppSec-focused, obviously, podcast. And so, I'm Ken Johnson at CKTricky on Twitter. And his is, long story short, I guess my background would be builder and breaker. So I've been on the internal Defender side. Right now I'm at GitHub. I manage a few teams there, red team and assessments, kind of the more applicable to this talk, so application security, but also full-on red teaming. But anyways, so I guess, that's how I met Seth a long time ago when Fishnet Security was still Fishnet Security before Optiv. Yep. Worked at Living Social with Mike over there on the end, which we'll get to Mike's background here in a bit. I've known Andrew forever. Like I was at Fishnet when I met Andrew.
Does anyone here know Andrew? Okay, maybe not.
Nobody?
Okay. Yeah, no one.
He's just like
fantastic.
One of the people
Yes,
put the conference on. So he's like the original founder of this conference.
Yes.
If you guys didn't know. Something like that, right? I think I got that right.
That sounds right.
That sounds about right. But we've all known each other for a long time, and I guess the point, I could go on and on about credentials or whatever, but like the point is we've all been in this industry for a long time. We've known each other for a long time, and we kind of grew up from like young 20-year-olds into middle-aged people, right? So in this industry, so I think that's the most important part to kind of talk about with all of us is we're going to share our insights, what's changed, what hasn't.
Yeah, but we will do introductions. I'll have Mike go first. We'll go outside in.
Sure, if my mic is actually working. I'm Mike McCabe. I'm the president and founder of Cloud Security Partners. So much like Seth, we're a small consulting company focusing mostly on cloud security, but we do a pretty good amount of AppSec too. My background is consulting and then also being internal at Capital One and some other small companies.
Capital One's the small company that we're
Other
referencing
small
today.
companies,
Other
yeah.
small companies. Okay, got it. All right, thanks,
It's no
Mike.
Walmart.
And then we've got Andrew.
Hello, my name is Andrew. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Awesome.
Glad to be here today.
How can we help you tonight, Andrew?
Yes, I am one of the co-founders of CactusCon. It's not, I hate to say it was my conference, but I was the lead organizer for the first 8 years, and now my wife is running it this year. We've had some kind of help between that. Aside of CactusCon, I currently am the vice president and general manager of Latin America. I'm actually living in Mexico, and I ran consulting services and delivery for Bishop Fox, and I was an app pen testing specialist for most of my career. So I've been with the company there for 11 years, so I don't really have a lot of other stories about cool small companies like Cap One. But I've been working in AppSec for pretty much the entirety of my professional career. Some level of software engineering or breaking into things.
Great. All right. So how this is going to flow, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand at any time. Like, we're not going to wait until the end. We want it to be pretty informal. As you've heard, we've got a fair bit of experience in the application security field. I dare say most of us started in application security before it was termed application security. But that's where I wanted to start with the panel today is maybe we'll start with...
Yeah, I'll say this. One of the things I'm trying to get out of this is what exactly has changed in your day-to-day job. I mean, obviously, all of our jobs have evolved over time from being, straight up hands-on keyboard ICs, although we all do some of that. But in terms of, just the general state of how either defense goes or how the offense goes, or just in general, your thoughts on, how have jobs changed in this field? And by the way, just to clarify, in case you aren't familiar with AppSec, it's web security, but I think most people in the room know what AppSec is.
Yeah. Does anyone know what application security is? Who wants to define it for us? Mike,
Well, philosophically.
philosophically,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, traditionally it's been testing web applications, but obviously that's changed a lot. Mobile applications, IoT, it all falls under AppSec these days, but code review, dynamic testing, sort of pen testing, all those kind of things fall within the AppSec realm.
Yeah, okay. So how has it changed for you since your advent in the space?
I would say things have improved, but I'd say it's uneven because I feel like we do a lot of engagements that are consulting. So come in, do a few weeks of testing, and then write up a report and say what is, good, bad, or ugly. And so sometimes you'll go into a place and you'll spend a lot of time and not a lot will come out and you're like, well, these guys take security seriously. They've probably done a code review. They've done AppSec testing before. And then you might find some very interesting edge case or maybe a framework or language-specific vulnerability, and that'll be like your big thing for that engagement. So you'll be like, okay, these people have improved. Clearly, things have improved. Then you'll go somewhere else, and like day one, you'll have full remote code execution, and you're like, well, nothing's changed. The industry is a fraud, and we make no impact. So I'd say it's improved in certain ways. Obviously, there's much more awareness of security and application security, coding standards, and just like ways to avoid these things. And I think frameworks have helped that a huge amount, but it's definitely uneven.
Okay.
When you say frameworks, though, like, can you expand upon that piece? Because
Well,
that's known to us, but I'm not sure if everybody knows.
Like, Django, I think, has a really great security model. They do a lot of forward-thinking stuff. Ruby on Rails, you probably never heard of it, but
Fuck you. That was a shot at me.
yeah. But see, I think the funny thing is those frameworks have done really great things. Then you go to like Node,
PHP? No, sorry, no.
PHP.
Yeah.
We don't talk about PHP. No, but you go to
We spent
Node,
4 hours this morning talking
Talking
about
about
PHP,
PHP.
so
well,
we do talk about it.
But then you go to like Node or Golang, where it's not a whole framework. You're kind of picking and choosing different pieces, or you're building stuff yourself. So if you're building your own session management system in your Go or Node app, probably not doing it right. But that's kind of, things have become more kind of component based versus having a whole MVC framework. And I think that has reintroduced issues that we solved with larger frameworks. So that's why I'd say it's uneven.
It's uneven. Okay. All right. What about you, Andrew? What's changed since you got into the space?
Wow. So I definitely would echo, I agree about frameworks having made a significant difference. In fact, I would argue that things like secure defaults have done more to prevent problems than any sort of advocacy that we've done as an industry, right? Like, I think as Microsoft rolls out things and makes harder statements about what should happen in a framework or what shouldn't happen in a framework, this general idea of make it sort of hard to do the wrong thing and easy to do the right thing has sort of become the prevalent theory on some of these more modern frameworks. And I think with that, it makes the configuration deployment and some of this a lot easier for companies, and I think it makes some of the assets smaller, right? But I will say, I haven't pen tested in quite some time. I was joking with these guys yesterday that I decided I'm teaching a class and I thought I'd do some bug bounty just for fun. And so I'm pulling up websites and I go, okay, I'll look at this one. And it was almost literally the same story that you got. I got one, I'm like, oh, they did a pretty good job. I think there's an evasion sequence maybe here, but I don't have the time to kind of play with it. And then I went to the next one and I had 11 vulnerabilities within 4 hours, right? And it was you run into this space where the speed of technology and what it's doing doesn't necessarily mean the speed of adoption has kind of caught up to it. Yep. And so in the case of the second company, although they could be using other technologies, I mean, they're not. They don't have a consistent deployment. They have a bigger attack space, things of that sort, right? And so I don't know. I would say that for me, it kind of feels a lot like more of the same. It's definitely not as simple. I wouldn't say that it's that, but it's definitely it should be more evolved in some regards than I think it is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would step into. It has gotten better, right? I definitely, I mean, when we tested back in Optiv or Fishnet days, every app had some sort of SQL injection or some sort of really severe vulnerability that we would find in it. Nowadays, it takes a lot more to actually dig those up, from my perspective. And it's usually edge cases. It's not like SQL injection in 90% of the pages or 90% of the application. It's like, oh, we may find a small like authorization error in one location and maybe 2 or 3, but it's not the entire application. And I think that goes back to the frameworks that you're talking about, the secure by default, even though we haven't gotten to the one true framework yet. But what are your thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I guess it's a few things have changed. When I started, and especially when you're building a Defender program, it was all about the bugs that you could find, right? So the idea of what we did was, you find bugs faster than the bad guys. And then over time, I think when I joined GitHub, I've been there for about 5.5 years, it was surprising to me that they were like, hey, bug bounties are a good thing. Submissions are a good thing. We enjoy when people submit critical bounties to us. That probably doesn't sound like much to you all. That was wild to me because essentially we were only as good as the bugs that we could find, say, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And now it's like, oh, no. You have a layered approach to your program. So you've got your bug bounty program to find the really like odd edge casey chained together vulnerabilities. You've got your tooling to help find some of the low-hanging fruit. Your security practitioners are primarily there for advice, right? So a lot of our web security people there, they're looking at PRs, but they're giving suggestions. They're giving technical, architectural kind of guidance and all of that. And I guess what I'm saying is the programs have become much more robust for application security teams. It's not just see if you can find the bugs faster than the bad guys. It's like, no, there's different types of bugs that you're going to be looking for. There's different ways we're going to handle that. We're going to build in paved path things that like solve these problems for developers, or to your point, give like secure defaults for developers. So all that's changed quite a bit from where it was kind of like, we're handing people like classic ASP code or PHP code and saying like, hey, make this secure. And if you don't, like, oh, well, I guess we're just bad at our job. It's like, it's an awful outlook. So things have improved from that standpoint, I think, quite a bit.
So how much of that is just the fact that you are engaged with a larger organization that cares about security, though?
That's true, yeah. I mean,
coming from a consulting background, right? Andrew specifically, right? Like how much of that, are you seeing improvement over time in the number of, even vulnerabilities or criticalities across organizations, or is it better?
I think to Mike's point before, companies as a whole are taking it more serious, right? Mm-hmm. Do they have the same resources as someone like a GitHub with, layered security and a bunch of approaches and teams that handle, this? I think that's not as common, right? I think it's some sort of mixture of the bunch. I know a lot of companies that have bug bounty programs, but then they struggle to handle the triage because they get so many things in that they can't necessarily process and manage all of it themselves. And there's a lot of noise that comes out of the bug bounty programs, a lot of false positives, a lot of whatever. And so, like, some companies have taken on these things for adoption, and then a lot of them are still kind of catching up to see sort of how they can layer that together, right? It's just, but as a whole, everyone is improving. I'll say that, but not everybody has the same level of resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Bro, like the biggest change is people know what AppSec is. Well, maybe not everybody in this room understands that term, but you know what web security is. You know about general web security flaws, or at least you've heard the main keywords. You got to remember, when we first came in here, I had to convince the Pentagon that like the way that people were breaking in was like through web security issues. They were like, well, we've got firewalls, like we're good. We've got this STIG that we follow. We've got gold disk, we're good. Like, I spent 2 years trying to just explain to the DoD, like, there's more than just network security issues, right? Like, there's other ways to breach the perimeter. So, like, to me, that's the hugest change is, like, developers even know these keywords, these, like, SQL injection buzzwords, remote code execution, things like that. That's a huge leap forward in a relatively small amount of time, I think.
Yeah. You all said that you didn't, know what application security is, but have you heard of little Bobby tables? Has anyone... Okay, I'm seeing some nods there, right? But that's how prevalent that it's become. Like, we actually have comics around it, right, about security issues that we run into on a periodic basis. Okay, so that's good. So where do you feel like the state of application security is today? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it just okay? Mike, you just said it was up and down. Mm-hmm. So why is that?
Well, I mean, I think first off, it's almost impossible to completely solve. You're never going to get to a point where anything, a company, a cloud environment, an on-prem environment is completely secure. There's way too many variables. There's way too many systems. There's way too much code. I mean, look at like a Node. I'll go back to Node. Sorry, Ken, but go to a Node program. Look at the Node modules folder. That's like 1 billion lines of code. I'm not even joking. It's an insane amount of code. So you can't reason. No one can reason about how all that code's always going to work. So there's there's tons and tons of different ways that things can break. So I don't think it's ever going to be to the point where things are secure. So great for job security, everyone. You're good until you retire, hopefully. Well, AI.
So that's good. That's it.
gonna rip
So
out
we're
that
done
headline.
now because Mike just said it's
Nothing will
over.
ever be secure.
Can't fix it.
Yeah,
Mike McCabe.
security nihilism.
It's
right?
security nihilism.
No,
I
but
don't think you're wrong.
yeah, I mean, AI is going to solve this, but that's a joke. What was the original question anyway? No,
So
but I
current,
mean-
so current state is it's never going to be completely solved, but
I
we
think
shouldn't
it's-
just give up.
No, I think you make the whole point of our job is to make it harder for people to exploit your systems, right? So before they could walk in and have that SQL injection, dump your database, get user credentials, use those somewhere else. That's super easy. Now they have to work maybe weeks, maybe months to get in, and that reduces the number of people who can just walk up to your website and dump everything out. So I think that's really the point of our jobs is to just build up those barriers.
There's a question.
ChatGPT kind of make it harder to do our job in that sense, now that a bunch of it being auto-generated in a way? I'm just kind of curious if it just gets blocked by the same filter?
You want to restate that?
Yeah. So you're asking whether ChatGPT has changed that mechanism, right? Like made it more difficult.
The threats, it's increased the threats, not more difficult threats, just are they about the same level of threats for all of them?
I mean, having like logged into ChatGPT and actually like asked it to, write an exploit, the code that it generates may be good from a generic perspective, but it's pretty awful when it really comes down to it, right? Like the deep understanding that's required to exploit a system. At least that's what I've seen. I don't know. Who else?
I would say it's like it's the same argument. It's a similar argument to like building tools and giving it to people and being like, well, if we release this in open source, like we're definitely going to get owned. It's like, no, you still need a skill set of the attacker, right? So I can give you all the tools in the world, but you're still a script kiddie if you don't know what you're doing. Sorry, we got a question right here.
I heard there were some vulnerabilities that basically what ended up happening was the coder copied from Stack Overflow and they had to copy to a lot of different apps, so the same vulnerability was across. I feel like with machine learning that maybe a vulnerability that you get with generated code is they brought it, they don't really understand it, and then they made a program that has that vulnerability in it because it's basing on
Copilot.
data.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we joke about that from a code review and a like recommendation for building, apps perspective that, developers just go to Stack Overflow and copy and paste code. But then like we're almost worse at it as security people, because when we develop a tool, what do? We go to Stack Overflow, copy and paste code, and then just tweak it, right? Or nowadays we're just asking ChatGPT, go generate me this, or Copilot, and we don't really understand all the mechanisms and everything that's going into it. So it probably will increase that attack surface from that perspective. I mean, I guess that's what I've come around to for now. All right.
You have another question?
Do we have another one?
From the point of view of threat intelligence, we've started to see a lot of supply chain attacks. And I know that there is a solution out there, the software bill of materials. I'm wondering, have you all seen much adoption of SBOM in the tooling or best practices? Anything like that?
Anyone want to address SBOMs?
Go for it.
No.
I mean, one way we handle
we have opinions, right? Like, if you didn't tell, we have opinions, right? Software bill of materials is actually something that's been around for a long time and is a great way to actually enumerate what goes into an application. I mean, we were just talking about Node as well, like 95% of the application is not custom code in that case. But to do a software bill of materials properly, you have to enumerate okay, all the dependencies of those dependencies, the dependencies, like as far as you possibly can, and deal with circular issues, and then the versions that are associated with that. It sounds great, and we have solutions that are out there, like some of the Sneak and other vendors that exist to try and assess the current state of that list. But in practice, when I jump into it talking about what I see on a daily basis, the code that we get, I don't think I've ever actually seen a SBOM associated with it, right? It's not something that comes up in web applications. I don't know if you see anything different.
I mean, we use, Dependabot alerts, right? And then that's how we find out about, like, any issues with our and to be fair, like, I mean, aren't lock files SBOMs, right? Like,
yeah.
gemfile.lock, like, package.json.lock. These are true. Those are locked in versions of all dependencies, sub-dependencies, and sub-dependencies, right? So it is, I guess what I'm saying is the data's all there. It's always been there. We're just using some new term, but really the way we manage it is we have, and I'll just share this, like each service has an entry in our service catalog, and each service catalog entry has a scorecard attached to it, which measures health, right? So if you haven't gone and you haven't like taken care of your alerts, so like, third-party supply chain risks, then your scorecard basically is low, and then you got to go talk to the execs, and it's part of our fundamentals program, and you have to go explain why you didn't patch or upgrade your libraries and all that fun stuff. So, yeah. So that's kind of how we've been handling it. So I think it's ultimately, a good idea, but it's some versions of it are already out. We just, haven't recognized that.
Yeah, it's early stages still. I don't think it's completely in there. Yeah, we've got another one.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I was going to say, I love that you brought up the execs, because half of my conversation is with, going through AppSec, and the other half is talking or translating that to leadership. And the term that I see is bubbling up is resource allocation to our tech debt.
Yeah. Paying down tech debt is, I mean, I don't want to like hog the time. You guys speak up over there if you got something to say on this, but I can honestly say tech debt is like, not just from a security perspective, it's like there's always friction there where engineers security people fall under engineers too. We're all engineers. We want to fix stuff, but the business is like we can only fix what the business allocates to us, like you said, like resource allocation and time-wise and all of that. So it's a constant struggle.
My question was more to are you seeing that conversation? I'm seeing it personally, but I was curious if you guys are seeing that as well in your conversations with when you come back with your reports. Are you seeing leadership kind of going, hey, we really need to get a handle on did we allocate the resources properly, or how can we better look at our current state and like reallocate better in the future?
Yeah.
Is that a conversation you're seeing?
It's not one that I'm interested, actually. Like, we'll have Andrew speak to that, right? Is that something that you see from an executive perspective when reports are delivered?
No, but it's kind of along an interesting sort of similar vein. So like as a pen tester, my motivation is to find cool stuff and then brag about it because that makes me look cool, right? And hopefully it has big value, meaning impact, et cetera, right? And what I've observed is that the developer who's getting that report has the exact opposite motivation to try to make it seem like it's not really that big of a deal. Like it's not, that's easy. Like that's not how it really works. And I don't think it's because they don't understand the value, they don't want to do it, but I've actually seen maintenance windows and resource allocations tied directly to the severity of a finding as it comes through. And so if I say something's like a critical issue, it's stop everything we're doing that's billable, and then everybody has to jump on ship. If I just say it's a medium, and it's like, well, I got a 30-day window that I can go fix that or whatever, right? And you see this allocation game between time, right? Because the problem with fixing tech debt, which I would argue is great, and I don't disagree with that, is that unless you tie it to some sort of business value proposition, whether it's to fix a bug or to increase features or whatever, it's kind of a harder sale, right? At least it was my experience as a developer. It's like, hey boss, I know this is all messed up, I want to go fix it. And then he goes, why? And you're like, I don't have a good reason, it just bugs me. Like that's not a reason. Even though it's true, and even though all the things, like it may have vulnerabilities, it may be out of shape, it may not support the things we want to do. like you have to like communicate it in terms of the value creation. So I don't hear that exact phrasing, but I definitely see the problem where people are like, well, unless it's a high enough risk, I'm not going to allocate resources, or I'm going to let it sit, or it's going to manage it from that end. That's where I see that more.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with that, right? Like from an external perspective as we go in, I don't think we always get to that level, but it does at least spur some of those conversations. And it really depends on who we're doing that assessment work for, right? At times it's the compliance org. As much as I'd always like it to be the engineers and the developers that I'm dealing with, PCI was a huge driver, right? Like there's these other frameworks that push pen testing and code reviews so I don't always get that sort of feedback, and they just take the report and they walk away, and then we come back a year later and they haven't fixed anything, right? That's, but that's the security nihilist in me speaking. So I don't know, Mike, what do you see from that perspective? I know you're more embedded in some some small organizations. Small and large, okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's inconsistent. I think it's a little depressing when you do pen testing and year over year you see the same bugs, but then you have some customers that, they're like, oh, if it's critical or high, we'll fix it right now. Mediums, 6 months. Lows, we're never going to talk about the lows. But then you have some places that I think take more pride in it and even tackle the lows. We do a lot of cloud security testing, and I actually find people address the lows as much as they address kind of the high risk issues, which there's probably some different reasons for that. But yeah, if you find like low web app issues, those just go into a black hole and rarely get addressed. It's not too often that you see those get fixed. Because there's other priorities. A low security issue is not going to be as important as a new feature going out the door to make more revenue. So,
Yep.
It's
Okay.
a sad reality. Are you all depressed from this yet?
Yeah. You will be by the time
Yes.
we're done. That's that is our goal for today. Okay, so from that, the other question I wanted to ask, since we've all been in the space for quite a while, was is there one thing or a couple of things that you wish someone had told you starting out, just from the perspective that you have now? Ken, you want to go first?
I mean, man, I have a million things, but I think I had written this somewhere.
It's the first thing not to start playing Lego City Underground.
It's undercover, by the way.
Undercover,
Thank you
sorry.
very much.
Sorry.
All right. Don't make fun of me for my Nintendo Switch gameplay. I think one of the things I had said somewhere, I don't remember where, but it was like, just don't take things personally, and recognize that you're just a part of the business, right? You're just an element within the business. I think that was that has consistently been a hard thing to temper, is like the passion I have, and probably everybody in this room has for their job, and then having that run up against like to your point earlier, right, about execs and making decisions about what things to do and tech debt to pay down and all that. That's honestly been, I just wish I could go back and say to myself, like, don't worry, you can give them their advice. They're still going to give you money. And like, if they don't take it, you're still going to keep that money, and you can just like keep going. So don't worry, you'll be fine.
Okay. All right. What about you, Andrew?
Somebody had taught me that I wish I had known then that I know now. For me, the thing that I tell a lot of my new pen testers, because I wish someone had said it to me, I guess if that answers the question, is just because you're highly trained to point out everything that's wrong doesn't mean that it's entirely broken, right? And that I think as pen testers, we actually have this really unfortunate habit of looking at something and going like, that's broken, that's neat, but probably broken, right? And if you get really good at it, that's like literally your job, is to look at something and go, it shouldn't work like this, it should work like this. And it can create a nihilism that you may have noticed, where you look at the world as if it's entirely broken. But it's interesting. I always tell them, like, that's actually a gift. It's a blessing, right? It's an opportunity for you to go back to somebody and say, here's an opportunity to make it better than it was before. And that little switch in how you think about it yourself and how even you communicate with people, I think, has a lot of empathy built into it, because as a guy who was a developer on the other side of the coin, like there's so many other constraints and so many other expectations, so many other things pushed on someone the last thing you want to do is made to feel like you're stupid because there's like a vulnerability or something in the code. And the reality is, like, if we take that approach from the beginning and we just say, like, you know, my job is to help you make this more resilient, or my job is to help you see the things that you couldn't see yourself because I'm a specialist, that actually creates a better working relationship with people, I think, and it really changes the conversation internally, because you can get really depressed. I mean, you can look at it and go, this whole thing is never going to work. I'm going to go, like, live in Montana and go fish with my friend. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of people who really think that's like a true story, but, you know, the world's not over, right?
Yeah.
World's
Okay.
not over.
Good. Yeah. That's valuable insight for sure. What about you, Mike?
I think, and I think this might just be true of our kind of culture, is we love breaking things, but to a business, breaking things doesn't really matter unless they fix things and become more secure. So I feel like breaking things is fun, you know, like picking a lock is fun. Designing a new lock that's unpickable, maybe not as much fun to you. So I think changing your mindset at some point to go from I'm just a hacker to break stuff to, like, I can create scalable solutions to solve this, like, the root cause. Again, I go to the cloud side where it's like, if you have infrastructure as code, that's my buzzword.
That's it. No more.
Yeah, you
Cut off.
you fix something in one place, and that gets applied again and again and again. You've solved that issue in one place versus someone going in and fixing one XSS here by adding output encoding and XSS here, doing output encoding. Like, switching your mind from just being like, this bug is sweet, this hack is awesome, here's like my attack chain, to, okay, how do I solve this for the company as a whole? That's not always possible, but, you know, that's a mindset that I think we have to shift to, because trying to become secure through like onesie twosies bugs is just never gonna work.
I wish someone had also told me that software developers are going to be spinning up infrastructure, just in general. That would have been a good heads up.
What?
That would have been amazing.
Well, we didn't say what you were going to make money off of. Just
Exactly.
yeah, in general.
Oh, we're going to stay gainfully employed.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it would probably be that relationships are more important than tech, right? That this kind of goes to Andrew's point as well, right? As you progress in your career, as you find vulnerabilities, as you find interesting classes of, you know, as you grow, the people that you interact with, both on the security team, both as developers, is going to, you know, influence where you go in your career. And those relationships, it's not worth damaging those for a single vulnerability, a single, like, call out because you were so cool and you tweeted about it, and all of a sudden that person will never talk to you again, right? Because they've been shamed. And you, like, yeah, we get really excited as security people that we found something shiny, we found a cool way to do something that was unintended, and forget that this may be someone's 10-year project, blood, sweat, tears has gone into it, and we just called their baby ugly, and not only ugly, but we're just going to go take it out back and beat it, right? And so framing that conversation as, okay, this is about relationships, this is not necessarily about code and about frameworks, because those are going to change over time. I can't tell you the number of different frameworks and languages and code that I've seen in 15 years, but I can tell you the people that really have stood out and what they have done. And even some of those that initially that there was an antagonistic relationship with, because I came in with the wrong attitude, some of them are now, you know, some of my best friends, and like they've helped me in my career recognize what's really important when we were building software. So,
There's a question.
oh, we got a question. Yep.
I was just going to ask about when the SolarWinds thing happened, a bunch of my friends who are developers are like, oh, zero trust. That's how we get around this, zero trust. And I was wondering what you guys thought about that movement that I really haven't heard much about after that big push.
Well, that's because it's like now -1 trust, so we need to have even less trust than we had before. It's a marketing term, right? Like that's, yeah. Gartner, I think, had something to say
Something
about
like
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So are you asking us to define zero trust?
I was
or?
just wondering where it went, because another thing, I thought it kind of related to this, because one of my Penchester friends, he's like, when you talk to a client, never trust, always verify. They tell you a bunch of crap, you forget it all, and you just go in to see for yourself, because you never trust them. I'm like, well, that's I can't, like, that seems like you really don't like your guy you're working for. You're like, never trust anything you say. Most of it's garbage.
The thing is, there's all these solutions like just-in-time access control, and there's like, with Kubernetes, you can have some levels of egress and ingress, what I'm trying to say, like internal firewall kind of like concept, like network segregation. That's what I'm trying to say. And so you have all these different things, but it really just all that stuff relies on people doing things the right way. And so it's like you would need to do it everywhere all the time. And so how realistic is that? And it really does come down to still the same people who are introducing bugs, authorization bugs in code, also being responsible for implementing some of these protections. And so it's just, I personally think that's a contributing factor as to why it's like it's not a thing we've seen.
I think
really
it's interesting,
manifest.
actually. I think that if you did some research into it, that a hyper obsession with something like that is probably going to create more bugs than it's actually going to solve. That's actually, I have a working theory on this, right? So, I mean, it sounds great, right? You think about it from a defense perspective. You shouldn't trust someone blindly, right? Or at the very least, you don't want to be in a spot where a breach of a web server that's serving like cat pictures means next thing I'm like employee data and I've taken over your whole everything. Like, there's got to be a space between this where there's authorization control, segregation, there's trust balances, whatever. Right? I don't disagree with that. But like when you hyper obsess on some of these things and you rotate on it, I think what happens to Ken's point is it's so much work that it actually introduces problem and it actually delays business. That's actually the biggest issue, because now when business wants to change, you got to go back and do a whole bunch of rule set stuff, and it creates sort of an animosity there. But like when I used to do software engineering, there's this thing that's somewhat obscure. I don't know how many people have heard of domain-driven design. But it's this like obsession with layers. Like everything's got a layer. There's a business object layer, a data translation layer, a layer on top of that to hand it into sort of controllers. There's a layer on top of that in order to expose it to a presentation tier. And the presentation tier has more layers and layers and layers, right? And there's all these like little translations. And when you think about it from a software end, I actually like it. Like, theoretically, it sounds great. There's a lot of cool things in it, but it's a ton of work. It's a ton of work. And so my experience is, unless you're like super bought in on it, what would happen is developers would like circumvent it, and they would like pop little holes through the whole thing because they were so tired of it. They were so like, this is driving me nuts. I'm just going to write direct access to the database and SQL like manually. I don't want to write the ORM, and I don't want to write you know what I mean? And so it's like that the more work you create, I think you actually could create more problems probably than you're solving in some respects, right? It's going to be like a balance. I don't know.
Yeah, so the more barriers that you put up, either as security or as in any of these technologies, the more ways people find around it to do their job.
Or because of it. I mean, anything you say can and will be used against you, right? So if you're putting new tech in the way, I mean, that tech has vulnerabilities. You're putting new stuff out there, that stuff might be vulnerable. I mean, from my end, sometimes the defensive tools are a great way to get in and then hide, because now I control the thing that was telling you somebody was in there, right? So it's like, that's great. It's great for me.
Yeah. Cool. And then did we have one other question? Yeah.
Just a couple of them.
So with the rise of languages like Rust, which handle memory on a different level, do we see possibly a taming of one surface, like network attacks, versus the rise of web attacks, essentially? Like, well, one vector starts to tame itself, another vector rises, suddenly you're starting to see the big thing is like configuration issues and more just establishment. Do we see possibly a taming of these fields and maybe relaxed lifestyle, I guess?
I think memory management vulns you'll see less of. Yes. Yeah, like buffer overflow stuff that we saw in C++. We were just talking about today, gas pump code, stuff that we used to look at, whatever. But in terms of like, actually interestingly, I won't go into it too much, but we were doing some research on one of the popular Rust web frameworks, and they introduced weighted routing and doing things in a way that we had never seen before. So we got a little farther into it, and we think that there's maybe something there with authorization issues. But I guess why I'm saying that is zooming out from the technology. the specific like Rust, anytime something new, and actually Andrew, we were all talking about this yesterday, every time a new web framework comes out, they literally do zero homework, it seems like, on any other web framework and what was a problem and how to solve it. So every time it's like the same. I did a talk I think with Mike at AppSec Cali in 2013, 2014 about how all the frameworks get it wrong in some way, some form or some fashion. And so anyways, that'd be my answer there, is that there are definitely going to be new web security vulns that pop up in new weird ways just because of the way they're doing things. But probably memory management stuff less so.
Yeah. I mean, we see that same thing in the Web3 space, like DApps and the crypto space. They're all high and mighty because we run blockchain. Yeah. And I'm like, but you have injection vulnerabilities like in your smart contracts, right? Built into them. It's like they just ignored what we learned for the past, 30 years, right? So, yeah. No. Go ahead.
Those are really good examples, guys. Thank you. I was just kind of curious because you mentioned the relationships and how it's more important. Can you guys give more examples of tough calls where you're like, maybe this won't work, but you maybe had to bite your tongue and not say anything. Other times where you really thought it would work and then maybe it didn't work out in the way that you thought it was because technology advances so quickly and it's hard to do all our research, right?
Yeah. So examples of like relationship.
Yeah, we prioritize the relationship over you were right or the technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the first experiences personally that I had with that, was at a bank, we're scanning internally, figure out that we can take over. The Cisco guys really loved Telnet, right? Really loved Telnet. They probably still do, but, came up with this list of, okay, this is stuff that we need you guys to fix. And we got a critical issue here because anybody can sniff the traffic and they can see your creds as they're flowing back and forth. And of course we expose that to them in the middle of a meeting with like our boss and their boss's boss. And the reaction to that was just basically they turned around on us and were like, well, are you Cisco security experts? And right? Like it was very antagonistic, and it took probably 3 or 4 years to repair that relationship because of that 10-second, or that like half-hour meeting that we had. That's one of the most negative experiences that I had. Granted, it was very early in my career, right? Some of the first like penetration testing that we had done. I mean, it was a new team at a new bank, and like they had never experienced this sort of antagonistic testing that was going on. That's mine. I don't know. Do you have any other experiences with people in that?
Yeah, I brought in an idiot contractor at Living Social to do a threat model, and he did one of the worst performances I've ever seen. I sat in with him and our CTO, and it was just the three of us, and the world's most awkward conversation as he jumbled through a whole lot of nothing. And I just was happy that the CTO liked me, and that was just an awful time because I felt horrible. And I learned from that you really have to manage your contractors. You never put them in front of execs before you've vetted their material. I was younger, I was less experienced, but the relationship saved that, and we had a good working relationship for as long as the company existed, which wasn't super long. But
I had an engagement early on in my career that I think is like what I hope that we try to move towards with people, right? Which is whenever we talk about a contract or a consulting engagement, I always try to ask the question like, why am I here? Right? I know what I'm supposed to do. That's the easier part of the contract, but like, why? Why did they ask me? Why am I coming in? Is it they don't have resources? Whatever. Because the answer to that question is going to tell you a lot about the relationship that you're going to have with people right from the beginning, right? And in this particular engagement, they were told they have to bring us in. They didn't want us there. They thought this was going to be like a scary thing where we were going to make them look bad and it was going to be used against them. And of course, that's not my job. My job is to like to think objectively and tell you, what's right, what's wrong, etc. And so I was out in Boston and met these guys, and we talked through the situation. It was so like they were escorting us literally around the building. We sat in like a private little place, and one of their team members just sat there and like stared at us for the entire engagement. And so what we did was we just started talking to him about the process. We just said, well, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. This is how it goes. And we compromised the whole system, right? So like worst case scenario, it was like, this is how we did it, this is what we did. And not only you did that, but you basically can't secure it. There's no way to fix this type of problem. But the care and the taking them to lunch and the talking and the walking them through it to make it like clear over and over and over again that I'm not going to say this is your fault. This is just the reality of design decisions. Like if you give someone a physical computer, it's their computer, right? And I can do a lot of this stuff. And so that relationship like got not even just on that engagement from literally I hate you and I don't want you here to, you know, this went really well, thank you for your help. They actually brought us in a year later because they spent an entire year prototyping a whole new design just to see if they could kind of like beat us. Like it was like they turned it into excitement. And so like that's an example for me relationally where it's like you got to understand where they're coming from to meet them where they're at, to walk them through that process and help them through it. And I did break their other design too, just so, yeah.
Of course.
Actually, I did it accidentally. That was my favorite part of that story. I was just messing around and I like realized that something was wrong through rebooting it out of sequence, and it was like, yes, gotcha.
You win. Good. Well, and I know we only have, I think we're supposed to be done 5 minutes before, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got about 7 minutes left. I want to focus on the future a little bit, right? So what is it that you want to see in security or application security or cloud security, Mike, in the next, in the short term, in the next 2 to 5 years?
I'm going to start it off.
Yeah, go for it.
Go back to my buzzword. Infrastructure as code. No, I'm just kidding.
Wait, no, you can't say that anymore. You already said it once.
I used up my credits. No, I mean, I think when you do a lot of cloud work, you see people doing formal declarations of what they want. So you write Terraform, you write CloudFormation. If you're unfortunate enough to do a lot in Azure, you use their languages. But you get into the mindset of, okay, I'm writing down what I want, and then that gets created. Obviously, there's edge cases. Obviously, there's relationships that might be unexpected. So in the cloud security world, I actually think it's almost easy to do security because you're saying, okay, I want this, tell me if it's not this, and then I will go fix that. AppSec is different because it can be a much more complex environment, but I do hope, and I think actually cloud is somewhat enabling this through things like API gateways, and again, formal declaration of infrastructure, formal declaration of like routes, things like that. If you can write those things down, if you can architect it, write it down, and then you have your tools validate that is true. AWS just released their verified authorization or permissions, I think it's called, and you can actually write a formal definition of your authentication flow. Then you can write rules against that to make sure it's doing what you think it's doing. There's a ton of this in the Terraform world where you can write security rules against your Terraform to make sure it's doing what you think it's doing. So I think that's the only way to really fix things at scale in the AppSec world, is having more formal declaration of what we want and then validating that versus being like, well, I'm going to write a bunch of code, you guys are going to tell me what's wrong with it, then I'm going to go fix that thing. Like, it has to be a system that is built to a spec versus like, unfortunately for artistic, boutique, organic,
artisanal, handcrafted,
thank you.
GMO-free
Yeah, I mean
development.
That's engineering. Like, civil engineers are going to be like, well, I want my bridge to look like this, and like, it's engineering, it's systems. You have to have a design, then you check that design. It can't be free form all the time. So I'm hoping that AppSec becomes more of that way, and I think we're getting there to a degree. But yeah, that's my hope.
Okay, all right, Andrew. 2 to 5 years.
2 to 5 years.
What do you want to see?
I think continuous assessment, the future of pen testing. I know it sounds self-serving because our company sells continuous pen testing. If you're looking for,
I don't work there, and I agree.
But I think this constant monitoring, awareness of an external perimeter, and rapid deployment of eyeballs of qualified people against change sets is going to be the only way we can handle things at scale. I think the point-in-time methodology is fantastic for things like we were saying, like really formal stuff where it's the first time maybe I've done it, and maybe it's great for the initial design and I'm putting it out there, or maybe something like a product that's going out the door and you don't get the ability to constantly monitor it in the same fashion. But I think continuous solution or continuous testing and assessment is going to put us in a spot where we're better positioned to address challenges in a more relevant time frame in a way that kind of actually gets things closer. Like, if you think about a pen test in general, I do it maybe once a year for certain customers. Well, it's like from the moment I leave and the moment you touch keyboard on that thing, then the entire year it could have a vulnerability and nobody's going to see it for another year, right? And nobody's even going to get their hands on it. But if you have a system that says, we're watching, we're monitoring, we know when changes are pushed or whatever, and then it changes, like someone can take a look at it, someone can provide feedback, someone can say yes, no, maybe so. And I genuinely believe that is the only way we're going to get to any sense of the fractional world or the scale that's happening against us.
Yeah, because change control is just a point in time. You get your one-time assessment, and then it's like how much code gets developed later that you never. I totally agree. Like pull requests are like really where vulnerabilities get introduced, right? But who's watching PRs every day? I mean, we have tooling, right? But like, what human being has eyeballs on it? Really, only software devs.
Right.
Which, yeah.
Okay, so Ken, 2 to 5 years. What do you want to see?
Where's Sean? Where's my man Sean? You still in? Sean, that's what I want to see. Sean is a software engineer who came to our course on the second day of the conference and sat there for 4 hours and went through as we droned on about how to do secure code review. That's what I want to see more of in 2 to 5 years, is folks like you. And honestly, I think we have a lot of opinions about this, but I think there was definitely, I don't know if it's gatekeeping or anything like that, but it's more of just, I think AppSec was like this niche thing, and like, you have to know, because you got to know code, you got to know like the security concepts, all this fun stuff like that, right? So my point is, and I'm going to wrap this up real quick, is just that I think we have to start looking at it, and Andrew and I were talking about this yesterday, start looking at it as more of a trade that can be taught in a repeatable way, and then arm the masses with that information, and then we build the army of people, whether it's software engineers or it's whatever, security practitioners.
Yeah, it's. I always want to say, my son always tells me it's not that deep, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That like it's really not as complex as we make it out to be, and I want it to be more approachable. We've had discussions and people on the podcast. What's her bucket? Is it Meraki or? It used to be a circus performer, and now she does security work, right?
Yeah.
And it's like security is everyone's problem, not just ours. And I think we're starting to recognize that. Like we push out, and other people are getting involved. We get more and more interest, more and more interactions with the wider community. I mean, the day that I can get my father to use 2FA or MFA, like that's going to be great, because I push it on him now. But the day that he asks me how to do something like that is going to be a good day, and I know it's coming. But until the awareness is there, I just don't think we're going to solve it. But it all feeds into the formal verification, this like the idea of continuously watching, continuous delivery of penetration tests, and then the people that are involved.
I couldn't figure out her name. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's one of the past episodes. If you want to know, like, let us know. Okay, so I think we're about out of time. If you want to continue the conversation, please join us on Slack or online. Ken and I are, pretty much available.
We should give it up for Andrew.
Yes,
Andrew
give it
got
up
a
for these
temp
two.
crown put in to make this talk when his crown cracked.
Yeah.
So
Tooth broke just a couple
Tooth
hours
broke.
ago.
this guy's in pain. He got a temp crown and he did it. So good job to you, Andrew.
All right. But are there any final questions, or do we need to wrap? I'm looking over here. We need to. Okay, we got 4 minutes. So
If you have any other things,
are there any other questions before we go ahead and close it out? Yes.
There are many things happening in AppSec on day-to-day basis. Are there any good websites you generally follow in order to keep updated on latest things? I follow Hacker News, follow some of the people on Twitter. Is there any other websites you?
Okay, so you're asking any or other news sources or websites that we traditionally follow?
Is it database guidance specifically you're looking for?
AppSec?
Oh,
Yeah.
AppSec.
So Absolute AppSec, we run a podcast. I don't know if you heard that. Outside of that, like Portswigger, right there, they do quite a bit of research. That blog. What else?
Clint's bog.
Clint, yeah, TLDRSec.
TLDR site.
Yeah.
That newsletter from Clint Gibler, that's amazing.
Daniel Miesler is a good
Daniel's,
one. He's got
yeah.
usually some cloud or AppSec.
Say that again?
Errata sec, is that what it is? Errata,
Eratasec, yeah, whatever that is. So there is I mean, hop in, if you go to appsec.com and hop into our Slack channel, we can give you
What's
multitude
Leafs?
of resources.
What's Leafs one?
Oh, it might just be Leaf
Like
Dresler.
404.
Oh,
404, yeah, 404 podcast.
Yeah, 404 podcast as well. That's another one that just started. Those are the guys over at Twilio
Mike.
/segment.
Don't you have one?
Yeah.
Well, if you like cloud security, yeah. That's
Cloud
relating
what?
to DevSecOps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
irishgingerbastard.com / still love you, Mike.
Whatever, Rex.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming. Enjoy CactusCon.
Thanks.